Hi everyone, and welcome to my kitchen. In the previous videos in this series, we've talked about the differences between conventional and organic agriculture, and we've also talked about ways that you can source and eat your food more sustainably. Today, in this video, we're going to be talking about ways that you can reduce the waste in your own kitchen. First, I have a few strategies for storing your food that will allow it to last longer and maintain its freshness in the fridge and the pantry. All right, first up in the pantry are potatoes and sweet potatoes. These you're gonna wanna store in a cool, dark place and also allow for circulation. And you'll also wanna eat these before they get too many sprouts on them. Next up in the pantry are onions and garlic. These, like the potatoes, you'll wanna store in a cool, dark place that allows for air circulation. But you'll wanna make sure to store them in a different part of the pantry than your potatoes and sweet potatoes to increase the shelf life. Also stored in the pantry are winter squashes and tomatoes, both stored at room temperature. Now, a lot of people store their tomatoes in the refrigerator, but that's actually gonna cause them to be a little bit more mealy in texture, so go ahead and keep those in the pantry, making sure they have lots of air circulation. Of the items that you're gonna store in your pantry, remember that your onions, garlic, and winter squashes are all storage crops, meaning that they can be stored in your pantry for longer than something like tomatoes and potatoes can. Next is produce to be stored in the fridge. First up, we have root vegetables, including beets, radishes, and carrots. Now, I don't have any of these in my fridge right now, but what's really important to do is to remove the leafy green tops off of these vegetables. And then what I do before tossing them in the fridge is giving them a rinse and then putting them in a plastic bag that can be reused time and time again. Next up in the fridge are cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. Now, I haven't found these to be all too picky, but one suggestion I do have is when you notice that the cauliflower and broccoli are getting a little bit old, feel free to toss them in the freezer. So for me, I bought this beautiful purple cauliflower at the farmer's market this past weekend, and I'm noticing a little bit of discoloration on the top. So what I'm gonna do is chop it up, toss it on a sheet pan, freeze it, and then toss the frozen cauliflower into a bag. And then that should keep for quite a while, and I can use that in a soup or even just like pan frying vegetables. So at that point, the frozen cauliflower and broccoli will be good for almost any dish. Next up in the refrigerator are the leafy greens like kale, lettuce, arugula, and chard. So what I've found most useful for these is to wash them and then store them in a plastic bag within the fridge. I've noticed that this really increases the amount of time that the leafy greens stay fresh within the fridge. So this past weekend, I went and got some chard from the farmer's market, and for this, I have the plastic bag that it came in, and I'm just gonna go ahead and wrap it up and then store it as is in the fridge, and this is a good system that has worked really well for me. And finally, you're gonna wanna store your peppers in the fridge as well. And one last note I wanna make is for any fruit that you have, if you wanna let it ripen a little bit longer, you can go ahead and leave it out on the counter or in your pantry. But when you notice it starts getting to the peak ripeness or even past peak ripeness, go ahead and toss it in the fridge, and that should slow down the ripening process also. Now that we've talked about the certain ways that you can store your food to increase their shelf life in the fridge or pantry, let's go ahead and also talk about ways that you can use those foods that might be past their prime. The first strategy that I have to share is making veggie broth. This is something that I got into just this past summer, and I've already made and used a couple of batches. So what I was doing is any onion scraps or garlic scraps or carrot scraps, those were kind of the main ones that I was using. I would go ahead and put in a plastic baggie and store in my freezer. And then once I had a full Ziploc bag full of these veggie scraps, I would go ahead and cook them down and make vegetable broth with them. And this vegetable broth can also be stored in the freezer and can be used in many meals in the kitchen. Another strategy that might seem obvious is baking or cooking your produce that's past its prime. A couple strategies that I've used are using the produce in veggie sautés or in stir fries. I've also baked zucchini bread and carrot cake loaves and tossed those in the freezer. And those can be taken out and defrosted at any time and then eaten a couple months later. My last and favorite strategy is pickling. This past summer, I pickled all sorts of vegetables, including cucumbers, carrots, cabbage, and onions. This I found to be a really great method for increasing the longevity of my produce and also having a snack to share with friends for later. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope this provided helpful strategies for reducing waste in your kitchen. As always, feel free to reach out with any questions. Thanks.